Hello everyone, it's Jen from Old Tinkerer Studio, and welcome to part 6 of the Illustrator CC Basics tutorial series. In this tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to use fills and strokes within Illustrator. We've learned how to make and manipulate basic shapes inside of Illustrator. Now let's learn how to use fills and strokes with those basic shapes. Let's start off on Artboard 1. Here you see a very simplified mandala. We're going to be adding color to each of these circles. If you click on a circle, you will notice that it has a black outline and a white fill. Let's say you want the interior circle, the smallest circle, to be green. All you need to do is click inside the circle and double click on the fill color. Now you can change the fill color to a green. Now for the next row of circles, let's make them a blue color. You can use the fill color like we did with the small center circle, but you can also use swatches to do the same thing. Select a circle from the row of circles and open up your swatches panel. If you don't see this panel, you can go to Window and click on Swatches. Now make sure that the fill color is active, and then click on the light blue swatch just below the purple swatch. An advantage to using the swatches panel is that we have access to various libraries. If you click on the libraries icon at the bottom of the panel, you see a list of various libraries that you can choose from. Let's click on the libraries icon and choose nature and then landscape. You will now see a second swatches panel with various swatches. You can drag down on the bottom of this swatches panel so you can easily see all of the swatches. Let's use the mountain swatch set, which is the third from the top, to color this mandala. Choose the very center circle again, and then click on the fifth swatch from the left, the darker gray color, to go ahead and fill in the circle. Now click on the blue circle, and then shift click on the other circles to make up that row to make sure that they are all selected. Once they're all selected, click on the fourth swatch from the left to fill in those circles. Now let's choose one of the circles from the next row and fill that in with the third swatch from the left. Now let's learn how to use the eyedropper tool to fill in colors. Shift click the other circles in the outer row. Once you have them all selected, click on the eyedropper tool and then click on the circle you already have filled. You will notice that each of these circles are now filled with the same color as the first circle. Now using your selection tool, click on the inner large circle. Make sure that you are clicking on the fill and not the stroke. When you have that circle selected, click on the second swatch from the left. Now click on the outer large circle, again making sure you click on the fill and not the stroke. When you have that selected, click on the first swatch. This is how you can quickly fill in a piece of art with color. Now that we know how to fill in artwork with solid color, let's learn about using gradient fills. Let's move over to artboard number 2. On the left you will see examples of the 5 gradient fills: horizontal linear gradient, vertical linear gradient, radial gradients, reverse radial gradients, and custom gradients. Let's begin replicating these gradients. Using your selection tool, select the top square on the right. Then click the gradient tool. Now if I simply click and drag across the square, you'll notice that nothing happens. This is because we need to establish our gradient fill. Open up the gradient panel. If you do not see the gradient panel, go to Window and choose Gradient. Inside this panel you have the ability to apply a gradient fill. For right now, just choose the standard and black and white gradient fill by clicking once in the upper left gradient. Now you will notice that this fill will be applied to the side square. Now I can manipulate the gradient. Let's say you want a bit more white in the gradient. All you need to do is go back to the gradient panel and move the white slider to the right. Let's move to the second square and make a vertical linear gradient. Using your selection tool, select the second square on the right. Then click on the gradient tool. Go back to your gradient panel and choose the standard black and white gradient. Now you will notice that the fill will be applied to the selected square. Now in order to change the angle of the gradient, change the angle from 0 to 90 degrees and hit your tab key. Now let's select the third square and apply a radial gradient. Using your selection tool, select the third square on the right. Then click on the gradient tool, and in the gradient panel, choose the standard black and white gradient fill by clicking once in the upper left gradient. Now you notice that the fill will be applied to the selected square. In order to make this a radial gradient, change the type in the gradient panel from linear to radial. You can change the angle and the color for the radial gradient just like you do with the linear gradient. If you move your cursor toward the gradient control, you will notice that a dashed circle appears. You can use this dashed circle to manipulate the shape of the gradient. For example, if I click on the top of the dashed line and drag up, I stretch the gradient. If I click on the left-hand control of the dashed circle, I can control the size of the gradient. For example, if I click on this control and drag in, I'll make the white part of the gradient smaller. Now select the fourth square and apply a radial gradient. If I wanted to reverse the gradient, all I need to do is go to the gradient panel and reverse the black and white stops on the slider. It is also possible to make your own custom gradients in Illustrator. So select the fifth square and apply a linear gradient. Now we will add color stops at the following locations: 25%, 50%, and 75%. Click anywhere below the gradient slider and add a color stop. Change the location to 25% and hit the tab key. Then repeat the process and make the other color stops at 50% and 75%. If you accidentally add a color stop or just simply want to remove a color stop, all you do is click on the color stop and drag down. For example, let's say I accidentally add another color stop and now I need to get rid of it. All I need to do is click on the color stop and drag down and away from the gradient slider in order to delete it. In order to change the colors, we need to click on each color stop and change the color from the pop-up color picker. So let's double click on the left stop and change the opacity to 50%, and make sure your RGB colors are all 0 to make this a black stop. After you hit your tab key, you can already see the changes on the artboard. Now let's click on the second stop, the 25% stop, and change its color. You will see options for changing the RGB color with the individual sliders. You can also use a hex code or choose from the RGB spectrum. Let's click on the red color in the RGB spectrum. Also, please note that you can use the drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner to change the color mode. You can choose grayscale, RGB, HSB, CMYK, or WebSafe RGB. Let's double click on the middle or 50% color stop. From the color menu, you also have the option of using swatches. Click on the swatches icon and then choose the dark green from the second row, the one that has the RGB color of 0, 104, and 55. Now double click on the fourth or 75% color swatch, and let's choose the same red color that we have for the second color stop. This time we'll use the RGB sliders. Change your red slider to 191, the green slider to 26, and the blue slider to 0. Let's click on the fifth color stop and make it the same color as the first stop. Let's change the opacity to 50%, and using the swatches panel, change the color to black. Now you have your own custom gradient. Now that we know how to fill in artwork with gradient fills, let's learn how to add strokes to the objects. Let's move to artboard number 3. Strokes are simply borders that surround the paths that you have created. Let's use the selection tool and select the first square. In order to add a stroke, you need to make the stroke active by clicking on the stroke icon. You can now pick a color from the color picker or double click on the stroke icon to bring up the color picker. Let's click on black in the color menu. You will now see a thin black stroke applied to the square. Let's increase the stroke weight in the control panel. You can either type in a number or use the drop-down menu. Let's use the drop-down menu and change the stroke weight to 3. You can also use the variable width profile in the control panel to change the look of a stroke. Let's use the selection tool and select the second square. Let's put a simple stroke around this square. Make sure that your stroke is active and then choose black from the color picker. Let's use the drop-down menu and change the stroke weight to 6. Under the variable width profile, use your drop-down menu and choose width profile 2. And notice how it changes the look of the stroke. We also have the option to change the brush definition on strokes. Let's choose the third square and add a simple 1-point black stroke. Under the brush definition drop-down menu, choose the charcoal pencil. And then let's change the stroke weight to 6. You can now see the charcoal pencil brush applied to the stroke. You also have libraries attached to the brush definitions. Let's go back to the brush definitions and click on the libraries icon. Then choose borders and border frames. This will bring up a separate brush option. If you need to, you can drag on the bottom of the menu until you can see all the brushes. Let's choose the mahogany brush, which is the 6th one down. And notice how the new mahogany frame is applied to the stroke. You can also change the opacity of a stroke. Select the 4th square and then add an 8-point black stroke. To change the opacity, go to the control panel and either type in a number in the opacity field or click on the white arrow and use the slider. In this case, I will just type in 50% and hit my tab key. You can also select where to align the stroke around a path. Select the 5th square and add a 6-point black stroke. Click on the word stroke in the control panel to bring up the stroke menu. Here you can change the cap, corner, and alignment of the stroke as well as the stroke weight. Right now we'll only deal with the aligned stroke options. Currently we have the default align stroke to center chosen. This means that the stroke is half inside the path and half outside the path. If we choose align stroke to inside, we see that the stroke is now completely within the path. If we choose align stroke to outside, the stroke is now completely outside the path. Now that we know how to add strokes to objects, let's learn how to add endpoints and dashed lines to the stroke of the objects. Let's move to artboard number 4. Open up the stroke panel on the right-hand toolbar. If you don't see the stroke panel, go to Window and click on Stroke. Click on the drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner and choose Show Options. Now you can see all the options available to you. Let's start with the circular object. This object has a gap in it, so it's considered an open path. This means that I can only align the stroke to the center. You'll notice that the other 2 align stroke options are grayed out. Right now we have a butt cap on this stroke. This means that the cap stops where the anchor points stop for the shape. If you change this to a round cap, it rounds the caps off. If you choose the projecting cap, it will extend the shape beyond the endpoints. Let's go back to the butt cap. And let's add an arrowhead. Go to the arrowheads drop-down menu and choose Arrow 2. Notice that this arrowhead is far too big. We can change the scale by using the scale options underneath the arrowhead's drop-down menu. In this case, I want to scale the arrowhead proportionally, so I will make sure that the chain link is clicked and type in 30 in the scale field and hit my tab key. Let's choose an arrowhead for the other end of the path. In the drop-down menu for the second arrowhead, choose Arrowhead 21. If you decide that you want the arrowheads to be reversed, simply click on the Swap Start and End Arrowheads icon. Now let's work on the square and add some dashed lines. Select the square and in the stroke panel, check the box next to dashed line. You will notice that there are options for dashes and gaps. Let's change the dashes and gaps to 8 points. This will mean that the dashes will be 8 points and the gaps between the dashes will also be 8 points. You can also vary the dashes and gaps. Let's change the gaps to 12 points. Now we can see that the dashes remain at 8 points, but the gaps have been increased to 12 points. You can now select how the dashes are aligned to the corner. You can choose preserve the exact dash and gap lengths, or you can choose align dashes to corner and path ends. Now that we know how to add endpoints and dashed lines to the stroke of the objects, let's learn how to add gradient strokes to objects. Let's move to artboard number 5. What we want to do with this clock is give the outer circle a gradient. Using the selection tool, select the circle and open up the stroke panel. Make sure that you have the show options clicked in the top drop-down menu, and the align stroke is set to align stroke to center. Make sure that you have the stroke active and click on the gradient tab. Then go ahead and apply a gradient. Just choose the white and black gradient. Now the gradient is flowing from white to black across the stroke. Under the stroke option, click on Apply a Gradient Across Stroke. Now we can use the color stops to make the outer ring of the clock look three-dimensional. Double-click on the white color stop, click on the swatches icon, and choose the RGB red, which is the third swatch. Double-click on the black color stop for the outer part of the circle, and then click on the color icon. Choose red from the RGB color spectrum, and then change the red slider to 50 and hit your tab key. We can reverse the gradients easily by clicking on the reverse gradients icon. Let's add one more color stop. Holding down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, click on the right color stop, the lightest red, and drag a copied color stop to the middle. Type in 50% for the location and hit your tab key. Let's make this stop a bit darker. Double click on the center stop and change the red slider color to 120 and hit your tab key. Now that we know how to add gradient strokes to objects, let's learn how to add variable width strokes to objects. Let's move to Artboard 6. The width tool allows you to change the width of a stroke at various points along the stroke. Select the line on the artboard and then select the width tool. Click on the second anchor point and drag down. You will notice that this section of line has now grown thicker. Click on the third anchor point and drag down, but not as far as you did previously. Now you will have a pinch section of the line. Hold down the Alt key on a PC or Option key on a Mac and click on the fourth anchor point. And now drag down, and you will notice that you made the lower part of the line thicker. Now hold down the Alt key on a PC or Option key on a Mac, and click on the 5th anchor point and drag up. And now you have made the upper part of the line thicker. If you want more fine control over the width, then double click on an anchor point to bring up the width point edit menu. Let's double click on the 6th anchor point to bring up the menu. In this window you have the option to change the width options for side 1, side 2, or for the total width, and you can also adjust adjoining width points. This is the end of part 6. I hope that you found this useful. Have a good day.